Hey, you guys. Welcome back. We have an amazing show tonight, and it's going to be regarding the origins and the reality of who Lucifer is, the devil. There's so many misconceptions, and it's just ridiculous. I mean, of course, the father of lies would make sure that there's that kind of a damage control going on. But we have a return guest of Gary Wayne. Let's bring Gary on. Oh, yeah. Hey, Gary. How you doing?
Doing very well, and thank you for inviting me back, and really looking forward to what we're going to get into tonight. And I think it should be, must watching for people out there who are looking for answers, because I think they're going to be very pleased with what we talk about tonight.
Yeah, I can't wait. Okay, and we're going to bring Brian Sadler in. Here we go, Brian. Yeah, there we go. What's up, Daddy-O?
What's up, guys?
How you doing, man?
Glad to be back.
So this is going to be a really interesting show. Let me put this up again. It's the origins of the devil and his seed, from the history to the present. And I think one of the main things about anyone says the devil, people have so many misconceptions. I mean, with the onslaught of from everything from horror movies to just everything just pouring out all the time. You know, the little red man with the horns and the a little pitchfork and stuff. I want to go back into the history and the origins of Lucifer. And Gary, can you talk about that?
Well, you were not really told a lot about Satan and exactly when he was created. But what we do know is that he would have been created probably, I think, as you deduce the information, just before the rest of the angels, because he's clearly the chief angel. And so if we go into Psalms 104, for example, where it basically has a retelling of the 6 days of Genesis, you have the angels being created before the physical earth is being created. So for Christians, then, it's a matter of, is that before day one? And if a person is a follower of the gap theory, which I would prefer to call the renewal of the earth theory, then it would have been even before that, and we don't know how long. And what's really interesting is that, Satan is called that ancient serpent, the dragon and the devil. And ancient definitely means before the flood. But, as you take those words back to Greek, and you're talking about the beginning, that is in the beginning. So it relates exactly to what Psalm 104 is saying. So I think at the level of position that he had, he would have been the first of the angels created.
What is in Psalms 104? What specifically is it? I know that a lot of people have these. I'd say a lot of people have misconception at church. They tell you things like, "Oh, Lucifer is the most beautiful angel of them all," which that is nowhere in the Bible. It is nothing in the Bible. Like, people don't know. Listen, like, we don't know a lot about Satan. We can only deduce from other theories. We have this concept that he is that he was a musician from a translation of the Prince of Tyre, the description of the Prince of Tyre, which I forget, where was that in? Is that in?
That's in Ezekiel.
Oh, Ezekiel. Yeah, where it gives us a description of the Prince of Tyre, and it says that his body is adorned with instruments, and we're assuming that this description is referring to Lucifer, and that this Prince of Tyre it's a parable relating back to the concept of Lucifer's fall. But again, it doesn't directly say it's Lucifer, A, and B, like, it could be like another entity. I mean, it is a parable.
What do you think about that, Gary?
Well, I know there's a lot of theories on some of these very interesting passages in the Old Testament that are prophetic. Now, this is a prophecy, and there is allegory in it. So there's a lot of prophetic allegory that's in there. I typically analyze prophecies like Ezekiel 32. You could look at Isaiah 14 being right up in the same sort of avenue. And I won't go through all of the ones that have it, but they have certain things that are in there. You have a reference that you have to understand the prophecy through prehistory. You have a prophecy, in this case in Ezekiel 28, where it's in the time of Ezekiel, so the time of Nebuchadnezzar, whereas Isaiah's 14 would be in the time of the Assyrian Empire. So it's a prophecy for that period of time. And we'll call it allegorical kings, but they would be real kings, right? And it also has end time implications, because that prophetic allegory, whether or not it's the king of Babylon, which would be Nebuchadnezzar, or it's the Assyrian, these are Antichrist archetype type figures, and they're trying to do the same thing that Antichrist will do in the end time by taking his throne into heaven. So not everybody agrees with my approach in terms of how I understand those prophecies. You either have to look at it as a parable, or it's in contradiction, or it is a different kind of prophecy. So when we talk about the Prince of Tyre, that would be referencing the same as an Antichrist figure like the king of Babylon or the Assyrian. And so when we get later into Ezekiel, we get the cherubim, who they're talking about. So we know it's an angelic type of being.
A covering cherubim, actually, it says.
A covering
cherubim.
And the anointed cherubim.
Yep.
So a very, very important angel. And this one does something no other cherubim does. It walks amongst the fiery stones. And cherubim don't do that. They're covering the throne, as you say, with the wings. And so this goes to the notion that there's something greater to this individual, which is why you sort of say it's probably talking about Satan. And where I'm going with that is it's the seraphim from Isaiah 6 that we're talked about, who are like ministers or priests before the altar, working amongst the fiery stones. And in fact, they're going to take a stone out of the altar and put it to Isaiah's lips to take the sin away, so that the vision or the appearance in heaven, whichever way that goes, I think it's a vision though, can proceed. And so these are ministering priests before the altar.
Yeah.
And so if we look at then some of the other descriptions that is provided by the cherubim, he has 9 jewels. And that's interesting, because you have like 12 jewels on the vests
on the priest,
for the Levite priest.
Yeah.
So this is like an old,
and it's like he's composed of those jewels.
Yeah, it certainly is a big. Well, he has the 9 jewels. He has other things that are talked about him that sort of glorify him as well. Now, if you look at that, that would make him, if he's the chief angel, he would also be the chief priest, the high priest. Before his fall, and we don't get his name technically. I think there's a couple names that we can go to, but he's a degraded form after he's tossed out of heaven. Yeah, and so we get the name adversary for Satan. So I think Ezekiel 28 is one of those great prophecies for a lot of reasons, because we get end time implications, we get prehistory information, and it's also for a prophecy of the time and how important Tyre was, which is also part of the allegory for end time Babylon. So it's just an absolutely explosive prophecy if you start to connect more of the dots in there with it.
Where do people get the concept of that he was in charge of the worship in heaven?
It's from that verse. It's actually from that verse. It's because that we're referring to, it actually says that his body is adorned with tubulars and or pipes. It says his body is composed of pipes. And so we've actually come up with this concept that they now tell, and he says he was beautiful. It says he was beautiful pipes, actually. It doesn't say, I don't think it says he was beautiful. But that concept, the church has taken and twisted into this thing that, like, oh, he's the chief musician covered in beautiful pipes. And he's so beautiful. And every time I hear a pastor go, Lucifer was the most beautiful angel, I kind of giggle a little bit, because I'm like, you're pushing the lie that Lucifer gave to all the churches. Because there's nothing that says he was the most beautiful except for himself.
I would equate it to something like this: is I'm sure probably maybe Hitler was a decent child, and
Yeah.
a decent teenager, maybe, and maybe even into
Until
he turned into
exactly.
a monster. And
Yeah.
that's probably the case with Satan. Is if he was created as the greatest angel, the leader of the angels, he probably had magnificent beauty, but he lost
Sure.
it.
Yeah.
Whatever he is now, it's not that.
Mhm.
What do you
And
think
that
about rank-wise is comparing him with Michael and some of the
Well,
other
this is an interesting thing that a lot of people aren't aware of, but the angels, the archangels that we know about. So there's Michael, there's Uriel, there's Gabriel. I think, is Gabriel considered one, right?
yes,
Is he? He's an arch.
Yes.
Okay. And then so it's Michael, Uriel, Gabriel, and is it Raphael is also
Raphael.
maybe one? Yep, right.
Yep.
So there's the 4 angels that we know, and they're very interesting to note that their name ends in L. Okay, so Michael, Uriel, Gabriel, Raphael. Okay, and then you got Satan. Well, that's not his name.
No.
This is a very big misconception. A lot of people don't know that is not his original name. His original
it's a title.
name. It's a title. His original name supposedly might be something akin to Gadrael, which would make more sense because then you've got Uriel, Michael, Raphael, and Gadrael. Gadrael means of God, and it's actually the G that's representative of something in secret societies. They have this.
and the
G.
Masons,
So they have this little G that's Gadrael. So that G is actually, we think that might be his original name, and the concept for that actually comes from one of the verses in the versions of the Book of Enoch.
Yep.
It actually says Gadrael in a version of the Book of Enoch. It's not in all the versions.
So in Hebrew,
It says the one who deceived Eve.
In Hebrew, you actually get that name Gadre. So it's a compounded word, and it actually means wall, and it means a wall of God.
Well, okay.
Yeah, and so that certainly, and I think because it's a name that's listed, and he's listed in Eden, just as the cherubim was in Eden in Ezekiel 28 that we're referring to. That there's a direct connection, but Satan could have had many names.
Oh, he totally,
with his title, with all of the different positions that he had. So. And Satan does not end in EL. Neither does Lucifer, as in Isaiah 14. That's an Italian word inserted for a Hebrew word into the English language, which makes no sense. And it's translated directly as Michael into English, Gabriel into English, but the word there is not. And Lucifer is the god.
It's because he's the father of lies. He wants to deceive people, so you don't even know what his actual name is. I think
Lucifer is one of the names that Gnostics and secret societies call Satan, like along with great architect of the universe. But the word actually
Lucifer means light.
Yeah. Well, it comes from a variation of Lux and the planet Venus out of Latin, and it originally originates in the Bible through. The fellow I'm trying to think, Jerome, who wrote the Vulgate, and he didn't really have a good understanding of what is this Hebrew word I'm looking for, and he kind of relied on some Greek words that were of similar type of meaning and were connected to the planet Venus or the day star, or as some people have it translated in some of the translations. But the actual word is Heylel. Hallel. And that is also the compound word. And that is where it's also, when you start digging back, what's the etymology to the word hell? You'll get a Norse variation, but a branch, which is, again, we'll be talking about a similar place, more like Sheol or Hades. But it goes back to this Hallel in Hebrew, where that word actually sort of derives from. And this is the god of hell. This is, it's just, and it may be a name that was applied later. But again, we don't know how many names he had. But those are the only two I'm familiar with that you could take it back to an angelic name that Satan would have had before he was demoted down to Satan status.
Yeah, let's talk about his names a little bit, because Lucifer, I actually heard something. I wasn't able to verify this, but the name Lucifer, I heard, was a name. There was Saint Lucifer, I believe, was like one of the popes that was trying to get elected as the leading, or he's trying to become Pope. And one of the other individuals that was trying to push him out actually, pushed forth his name, Lucifer, and said, "See, he's the devil." And I don't know I don't know if that's a true story. I don't know. I wasn't able to verify it, but it was an interesting thought because I was like, I wonder if that's some of where that name came from.
Time-wise, at what point was the name Lucifer injected into history?
Well, it fits the timeline, the story that I heard, because supposedly it happened when the popes were when they were like in place and when they were taking over, supposedly. But
any idea what year that would have been, or?
No, it was it was like 14 something, or I think, or.
Yeah, so I would say then it even predates that into Jerome translating the Old Testament into Latin, where he uses Lucifer in Isaiah 14. So I think, the thing is what the Catholic Church is that there are so many Gnostics that are molded into it through their Gnostic orders, whether or not it's the Benedictines or the Augustines or the Jesuits or, all of them. And so,
who knows if anything?
I don't know whether Jerome was a true Christian or he had some Gnostic. There's just too many of them there. Saint Benedict was, the one of the ones who sponsored the Knights Templar, for crying out loud. And it's just, and he was a Benedictine knight, and part of the royal bloodlines. But that's another rabbit hole. So,
let's talk about something else.
Jesuits. Yeah, giant rabbit hole.
Yeah, totally another thing. The other thing to talk about is when it comes to the names that Lucifer goes by. So we've got Lucifer, Satan, Beelzebub, which isn't, I don't know, but Beelzebub is another name that it has some translations, but there's also people alluding to the idea that Beelzebub is actually a son of Satan.
Yeah.
One of his seeds, because it does say that Beelzebub is the prince of all demons,
as does Satan, because when you take the devil back to Hebrew, it's the word diablos, right? As opposed to daemon, where you also see devils. This is the other application, but that's for the demon spirits. And in that definition, under diablos, he's the prince of all of the demons. So it's interesting what you're saying about a possible offspring, because in polytheism, you have parent gods and you have offspring gods. And so in the Canaanite pantheon, where this fits in, I think, rather nicely, you have El, who's the parent god, who also created giants and probably went to the abyss for his crimes before the flood. He had a son named Baal. And that's where you get that first part of that name, Beelzebub, coming in. Yeah.
And Baal.
Interesting. Yeah,
God
Baal.
They worship for years.
Yeah. After the flood, it was the Baal and Ashtaroth and all of the Baalim ruling from Mount Hermon before they disappear. So I think probably they went to join the rest of the impassioned and evil fallen angels. Not all of them went there, but the worst of the ones did, and the impassioned ones. But oddly, Satan does not.
Yeah, right. And that's interesting. That's very interesting, because it makes you wonder, like, was he just so sly that he was able to influence others to do his work for him and evade seeking a punishment? Like, is that really what he was doing?
I think it was more like he's being reserved for future judgment.
Well, I mean, we know that the angels, all of the Nephilim, or the Anakim, rather, or the Anunnaki, if you will, in some regards, the original angels that fell, the sons of Anak, are all locked away. The original ones, they all were locked away into the abyss. But except for Lucifer, he's the only one of that didn't get locked away in that original sort of fall there.
Well, we're not exactly 100% sure all the fallen angels would have gone to the abyss. So when you're talking about Jude 1:6 or 2 Peter 2:4, it's talking about the ones who sinned in the time of Noah. So it seems
those
to
ones.
be
that's what
referencing the impassioned ones. I tend to add another group in there just through more deduction, is that those who also violated the laws of creation that would have then blasphemed by doing so the Holy Spirit, would have gone in there. But
You know,
there's so many angels that maybe not all of them went. And I think there's still fallen angels that aren't in the abyss. They just weren't the worst of the bunch, I guess.
I would actually add to your theory even further and say that there are still angels that fall. And I know that sounds a little crazy, but I'm gonna explain it to you actually in a very unique way. What do we know about Satanism and Satan worship and Satan seances? So, I mean, this is a little in-depth perspective here, and this is me speculating some ideas here, but the interesting component is that if a lot of people know about why do Satanists perform the seance messages and the things that they do, I've studied this quite a bit and been connected with individuals. I know some of the things that they all involve. They involve children, and they involve pain, children sacrificing in pain, and they also worship redheads in the Church of Satan. I don't know if people know that, but they worship redheads, and they involve sexual acts. Okay, and so the Bible says that least you hurt one of his little ones, it's horrible for you. And basically, he'll come to your aid when you're in pain, and God is here. So I think a lot of seance acts, satanic worship acts, are a continuous, perpetual state of trying to get more angels to fall. The ritual is, let's bring a child into this room while we're doing sinful sexual acts, while we're hurting people, put this child in pain, put this person in pain, and then evoke a spirit of God, evoke an angel to be present, and then force that angel to watch what we're doing or be involved in what we're doing to try to get it to get that angel to fall. And they always have that's why they have naked women standing around. I know this sounds a little crazy and out there, but the reality is it's like trying to throw porn in somebody's face. That's literally what they're doing. They're like, look at it, and they're trying to do that. People don't know that that's what they're doing, but the Bible even talks about angels. It says that a woman should cover her head lest they offend the angels. It says the covering of the head. Well, so now, covering of your head might offend the angels. What does that mean? As to not offend the angels. So, but when you understand, it's because the angels fell to the beautiful women in the beginning. Their brothers did. So having a woman exposed fully is kind of offensive and kind of in a way, something that they're not hey, I don't want to be put in this awkward situation.
And a temptation because they don't want to go to the abyss, right?
They don't want to go to the abyss.
I actually think there's a good possibility that, I kind of agree with you. And I'll tell you why we have to be careful to say that they all rebelled all at one time, because we're not provided that for information in the Bible. The only thing that we are told is that by the time of the midpoint of the last 7 years, where you have war in heaven, a third will be cast down. So at that point, a full third of how many will actually.
So many people don't understand that verse. So many people take they take that verse and they say that a third of the angels fell with Lucifer from the beginning. And I look at that verse and I go, no, it doesn't say that. You're referring to a verse in Revelations in the end where it says by the end, a third of the angels will have fallen. Yeah, so I think they need to be aware of that. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you completely. And people don't know that. I think they are continuing to be put into positions of choosing to fall. Yeah. And it's something that.
And there's more than 200 fallen angels. That's just the 200 that are.
That was just the 200 in the beginning. Yeah.
And there
those are the 200.
More.
The 200 that they're.
Ones.
Yeah, the 200 they're talking about there are the ones that I think are locked in the abyss. Those
for sure 200. They would be. Yeah, we know for sure they would be.
Not the rest of them. But
so in the book of Daniel and also in Revelation, and this could be an allegorical number, but it would still represent a large number no matter how you would take it. But the number is 10,000 times 10,000, which is 100 million angels that are seen in heaven. So if by the time of Revelation 12, a full third rebel, that would be 33 million. There are a lot of rebellious angels, and we also need to be aware of that. And they all answer to Satan in this earth because Satan is the prince of this world and the god of this world.
That's what Jesus calls him.
Yeah. And there's another interesting thing, and I kind of didn't get to it in the beginning. I'll go back to, and how do we know that he would have been sort of the first sort of creation, or at least ancient by a whole different sort of standard than just simply from before the flood? It's because when he's called Prince in John 12:31 and Ephesians 2:2, he's that word goes back to the Greek word archo. And archo means first in rank, first in power, first period, primary, in the beginning, before creation. And it's also the root word for, as part of the compound word for archangel, right?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes,
Interesting.
archo, yeah.
Is that like the Arco gas
and
station?
Archon, which he's also called, the great Archon, is also, it's the same word as archo, it's just the past participle of archo. So all of those are sort of go to the name of who he is. So when we look at the Council of Gods in Psalms 82, he's still sitting over top of that as the counterfeit assembly that's talked about in passages like Isaiah 14 that's in heaven and other places in the Bible. So he's counterfeiting everything because that's what he does.
This is exactly what I want to bring up, is the concept that he's still in heaven accusing the saints. There's two falls.
Well, the Bible calls him the accuser of the
when
saints.
He's cast out of heaven in Revelation, and he takes a third of the angels. That's when he falls to earth, and there's with great wrath.
Wait, that's what we're talking about. He wasn't cast. He wasn't cast out of heaven with a third of the angels.
Right. That's what I'm saying. He's still there accusing the saints.
No. But yeah.
No, I would interpret that as he was cast out of heaven in ancient times at the time of the rebelling, but not with a third. That's a different event. But as Satan's status for a time, he's allowed to go back into heaven because we see him accompanying angels in the book of Job.
Yeah.
When they're told to present themselves. And who knows, he may still be ordered to present himself as to what he's been doing, even though God would already know. But there's a process here that is seemingly holding him within a set of rules that Satan obviously doesn't like, but it sure beat going to the abyss.
Well, we don't know. The Bible says there's mysteries we don't know, and even God says, that he hasn't revealed the mysteries to the angels, all of the mysteries unto the angels even. And so there's things that we just don't know. Yeah. So like there may be rules in which the fact that Lucifer didn't get locked away to the abyss by the status of who he is, that he was an archangel or whatever, that God said, okay, because of the status that I've given you, I won't send you to the abyss because maybe it's part of this thing that's the reason why he hasn't been in there. A lot of people like to think Lucifer's the king of hell and he's chilling in hell, even though his name is Hell-El.
No, he doesn't want to be there.
Lucifer is not in hell.
He's not there.
Lucifer's not in hell. He doesn't want to be in hell. Yeah. And he's just like, okay, I'm going to be not in that environment. Like, and so he's not a prince of hell either. He's not, and his people aren't walking around with pitchforks poking people over in hell. Okay. That's not what the demons do.
He's the prince of this world.
Yeah. He's of this world. Not hell.
Not hell.
About being the accuser though, him accusing the saints.
Yeah. He's the accuser of the brethren, it says. So yeah, he's the one that, the interesting thing to know about the accuser of the brethren. This is what I actually know from my experience with casting out demons. My take on how a person becomes demonized is from this line. Actually, it comes from this perspective, the accuser of the brethren. Okay, so when you sin, it's not that when you sin immediately people become demon possessed. It doesn't work like that. Okay, there's a possibility that you might sin and a demon doesn't go into you. Okay, so it's kind of like police. I like to think of it like police. Let's say you sin and there's no demons present. You might get away with not having a demon jump into you. It's possible. But if you sin and there happens to be an idol in the room that a demon's attached to, he sees you. And then he goes, look at that person. They just sinned. And now I know. And now they know God's not looking, because it says God cannot look upon sin. So God turns his eye, and then the demons go, we can go into him. God's not watching at this moment. I just saw him sin. And that's how they accuse, because now they're entering into this person. And then when they're there, they're like, oh, no. Look, God, look what they did. I know what they did. I saw what they, here's what they did. That's why I'm here. It's not you, Lord. It's this person. He is not faithful to you. Therefore, I am here to possess this person or to afflict this person.
Very specifically, can a demon enter into someone who has the Holy Spirit inside of them? I know they can be oppressed.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to go biblical, yes, 100% he can. In fact, there's a story that talks about this in the Bible. Ananias and Sapphira, there's a verse that says specifically that they were filled with the Holy Spirit. Okay, and then a few verses later, he says to Ananias, he lies, or Sapphira, I forget which one. Anyways, he lies and says he sells his house, all his earnings, and he keeps 10%. But then he tells, I believe it's Paul or whoever, that he that's all of it. And he gives him it, and then he goes, "Why did you let Satan fill your heart?" And it's the same word "fill" in the Greek translation as it was just a few verses earlier when the Holy Spirit filled his heart.
But so we know this is different, sir, because that's pre Pentecost. So after Pentecost, when you accept Jesus, you have the Holy Spirit living inside of you. Back in the old times, he would come in and go, and he would come and go. But so that's a different thing. So
no, I don't think so at all. Actually, not at all.
But everybody sins. Everybody were weak, and you do create opportunities for these things to happen. And I think in the early going, you could probably, if it's, you could probably ward them off, right? Depending on how powerful it is. But demon possession and angelic possession, or they would call it an incarnation or an avatara relationship, is different than typically a demon relationship, unless you're an adept who is looking to bring that demon in to add additional power. Similar, but there's still two spirits that are, in that oiketerion, that dwelling place, that demon spirit would like to hold on to for as long as it can, because it needs to rest somewhere, right?
I mean, yeah, the demons, all I know is that demons definitely go into Christians. And I know that for a fact because I've heard plenty of them out of people that are, and Jesus went around praying demons out of the people in the churches. And the Bible actually says healing, and the word healing is sozo, which actually means deliverance, or salvation means sozo, which is healing and deliverance. And it says that healing, though, is the children's bread. So you already have to be a child of God to receive deliverance and healing. So, I mean, it's not like Jesus went around healing people that weren't. In fact, Jesus didn't cast a demon out of a woman who came to him at the well and said, "Hey, there's a demon in my daughter." And he said, why should I heal you? The healing and the deliverance is for the people of God, and you're not a person of God. So obviously, deliverance is for people that are believers. It's not for people that are unbelievers. So yes, if you have Christians, if you have a spiritual thing, you can accept Jesus and you can still have a demon. Just like a Christian can have a Ferrari, you can smoke, you can have a demon.
Between having a demon possess you or oppress you. See, there is a
difference. Yep.
There actually, no, the word it's demonize or demonizea, or I forget the exact translation, but the word is demonize, and it's poor translation. It's actually the same word in all of the Bible. They are demonized. Demonized doesn't mean it possesses you. It doesn't mean it oppresses you. It's just demonized. It literally says this man was demonized. And so demonized can happen to you whether you believe in God or not. It depends on what you open yourself up to. Okay, what you have given permission to. What seances or things you have allowed yourself to be open to. Allow demons to go into you. So yeah, anyone can be demonized, just like anyone can, have $1 million if you really, really want it. Like you can get yourself a demon.
There were many people that demons were cast out of that weren't believers yet. And some of them became believers.
I don't know if that is the case. The individuals that got the demons cast out of them could or could not have been believers. I mean, they were obviously believers enough to walk up to Jesus and say, "Hey, I know you're the Son of God, So obviously they believed enough. You know what I mean?
Right.
So Jesus doesn't, I mean, the only time we know a non-believer getting demons cast out of her, it was actually the woman that was following the two, following, I think it was Paul, and Barnabas or something. Anyways, following him around, and she was going, these two are men of God. They're men of God. They're men of God. And she was actually promoting that they were men of God, promoting that they were of Jesus, and saying they are the people of the Most High. Listen to them. And finally, he gets so irritated.
The demon act guy that was in the graveyards.
Yeah. Well, he came to him and said, "You're the Son of God." Like he came straight to him. So he obviously believed. Who knows if he was
at that point? I mean, I
don't
know.
Well, we don't know if he was a Jew. He could have been a Jew.
He could have been chosen in times past, and that was just the manifestation of that. But,
yeah, he could have been a Jew. He could have been a very respectable Jew at one certain point. Just got so many demons into him that he became the crazy person that lived out in the mountains. Like we don't know the history. We do know that the woman that got the demon cast out in the story I was telling previously, the demon left her, and not of her own will, and it was a spirit of divination that left her. So she was able. This is very interesting because a lot of people in church will be like, "Oh, I'm going to prophesy over you, and I'm going to divine over you, and like give you stuff." And it's like, well, are you prophesying with the Spirit of God, or are you prophesying with the spirit of divination? And there is two very notable statements mentioned in the Bible. This is a whole nother topic we can get into. But a lot of people might have divination perspectives, and now we're getting into demonology stuff. But but it's very real. Let's just put it that way. And yes, demons are very real, and they can be in people. It don't matter who you are; they can jump into people. I just dealt with a demonic person today. I had to deal with a demon person that I didn't even get to cast the demon out of. It was pretty intense. This girl pulled out a knife. Oh man, it was crazy today. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, they can go into anybody. And she, the whole time, by the way, the woman today was talking about Jesus the entire time. The demon was coming out of her while she was saying, like, I cast demons out, and pulled a knife out and was like, it was pretty intense. So, and she was like, oh, pray. She's like, I pray in tongues. She even talked in tongues while the demon did in her talked in tongues. So this is a whole nother, we won't go in this direction, but let's stick into the normal.
I think we can talk about the father of lies, because there's such a fabric of lies that's been created for thousands of years. That is just, it's so thick historically. When I talk to people who are atheists and, well, what about this? And what about this? And look at the, how far this goes back. And, it's like you can't predate the creator, It's like, well, before Christianity, no, you can't do that. But I mean, as far as the father of lies, he's had thousands of years to create all these levels of deception. It's overwhelming. And that's what we talk about the scripture as being the light. You can turn on the light of the scripture and see all the cockroaches run. That is what shows you where the deception is.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some more of the deception in regards to hell, because this is an interesting one that a lot of people are very, I'd say, like ignorant of, and they don't, a lot of people don't know this. But there are separate places in the Bible that are talked about. And there is multiple different places. There's Abraham's bosom, which is also noted as Sheol, which we believe was the holding place for all of the spirits that died before Jesus came. All of the spirits, this is what the keys of death are that Jesus took. They're actually the keys to this place called Sheol. And so there was a chasm in Sheol, a big gap where they could see the people on one side and the other. And one side was miserable and hot, and Lazarus's servant, or Lazarus, the servant of the rich man, was on the paradise side. And the story of Lazarus died, and then he went into the negative side of Abraham's bosom, or Sheol, and literally saw his servant on the other side, and then was like, hey, give me a drop of water. Can you send him to give me a drop of water? Send my servant over here. And the angel was like, look, no, you're like done, dude. Like you already chose. And he's like, oh, send him to go talk to my brothers and tell my brothers that he's real. And he's like, dude, he didn't listen to God before. He ain't gonna listen to a dead man appearing. Like, whatever, dude. And so we know that that's a place, and we know that that was a story of something. But that place, I believe, is the place that when Jesus died, it says he descended. He pulled basically the people out of the good half of Sheol, so it's divided in two, and he pulled those people out and brought them into what we call paradise, which is it's not heaven where God resides, but it's just below heaven, because there's also, what is there, 3 heavens? There's the heaven where God resides, there's the heavenly places, and then there's the heaven, which is our earthly realm, which surrounds us. But they were brought into paradise. And then
what is the scriptural reference for that?
I'm trying to remember.
You know, Gary?
I don't know if it was
For what?
the heavenly places. It says
So when you take Shamayim, which is the Hebrew word for heaven, which you use the Hebrew word, and that's the plural too. So Shamayim, it's defined as there's 3 heavens, as opposed to the polytheist 7 heavens, which are thought to be sort of rooms and things, where storehouses of,
grain,
hail and stuff like that, will come out of, but they're within the 3 heavens. So the 3 heavens are, as it's defined, is the abode of heaven where God is and angels are in the spirit realm in a different dimension. Then there is the 2 heavens in the physical world. One is the heaven, as it's called, the firmament in Genesis 1, which includes everything from the sun inwards, right, including the moon. And then outside the firmament is the other heavens. So first heaven, second heaven, third heaven. And so there are storehouses as you get in some of these places. We don't know exactly whether it's in the spiritual realm or it's somewhere outside, probably the firmament, one would think. But it's really difficult to get a little bit more specific than that on where heaven is. When we're looking at, I tend to look a little bit differently on Abraham's bosom. That is,
I was going to ask you, what's your opinion on that?
Well, it's part of the parables that Jesus does, and parables are, like, as we understand today, as a fable with a message. That's the polytheist version of it, right? So there's a moral of the story there. This was a common understanding in terms of a mythos or a myth at the time, because they had a lot of arguments between the Essenes and the Sadducees and the Pharisees as to what happened when you die, and was there going to be a resurrection, and they debated it endlessly. So we want to be careful with Abraham's bosom, because what we're told both in the Old Testament over and over and over, and in the New Testament over and over, is you sleep. Just like when Jesus went to Lazarus and said, he's sleeping, but he was referring that he was dead. So humans sleep, demon spirits don't, and we sleep until our resurrection. And so when we're looking at, this is not to take away from the point that there are different places that hell includes. Hell is a mistranslation by translators, and it doesn't matter whether you're using the King James Version or any of the other translations. They've conflated 3 terms into one. And so if you really want to dig back and understand a little bit better about the passage that hell may show up, and you need to know, what are they talking about? So hell is encapsulated as the lake of fire, which is something that happens
in Revelations.
In Revelations, in terms of after the mark of the beast or the false prophet at Armageddon and Antichrist go in, the angels, as in the book of Matthew, are sent to the lake of fire in the end times. Satan goes there at the end of Revelations, at the end of the millennium. You have the second death, where humans are resurrected and will go, if they're sentenced, to the second death, that's where they're going there. So lake of fire is one place. And the other place is, as what was discussed earlier, is that it is called Sheol or Shel, or however you want to pronounce it. It's known in Greek as Hades. It's the underworld. It's the other world. It's Anwin. It is thought to be in the earth as it's described, but likely in a different dimension. And so it occupies the same space, but it's either on a different wavelength in a different dimension, likely takes some sort of portal or something to get there, at least according to the polytheists. And then within the underworld, there's a separate place where the impassioned and the worst of the fallen angels that we talked about earlier are imprisoned. That's called the bottomless pit, or just the pit in the Old Testament, and or in some translations, the abyss. And so you have three different places that, to properly understand the passage, you need to understand what they're actually referencing there. And I think that was done. Not that I think our Bibles are bad, but fortunately we have the Greek for the New Testament and the Hebrew for the Old Testament, so we can test the veracity of the translation. I think they conflated that so they could allegorize away the lake of fire, the polytheist, right? That they always say it's not really true. There's no lake of fire. That's one of their cornerstone doctrines, because it has to be, because they don't want to go there.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because there's actually another story that when you say the abyss there and Sheol, there's actually the story of Moses when he's taking the people out of Egypt, and they're out in the desert wandering. That they sin against God or something, and then I forget what they do. They do something where God basically is like, I'm going to wipe them all out, and then Moses is like, no, don't wipe them all out, like please, like. Don't take them all out. And so he's like, all right, fine, separate them. And then it says the earth opens and they fall into Sheol. Yep. So it literally says the earth opened. And so it says there was like a big earthquake, and everybody freaked out because the earth was they said all of their stuff was swallowed by the earth. So there was like a cracking or chasm or earthquake or something, and people just fell into the place of Sheol, which is in the center of the earth, supposedly. And it describes saying that, you know, this is in the center of the earth, and the abyss is also in the center of the earth, or the depths of the earth.
Yeah, and obviously what happens to these Israelites is something that is bringing down the wrath of God.
Yeah.
Right?
Not a good thing.
Yeah, and that they may be being cast down into the place where demons reside, because they tend to, at least in polytheism, come back and forth between the underworld or Hades, and just as the gods did. And that because God had sent them Moses to lead them out, had freed them, had showed them all of his miracles, had promised to protect them, was going to look after them, was going to take them to the promised land. While Moses was up in the mountain, as I recall to the story that you're doing, I mean, they basically had a rebellion and they created the golden calf, and it was just like God's going, and I think he's testing Moses is what, because God's Alpha Omega. He knew what was going to happen beforehand. So I think it's just, again, testing and refining Moses for the challenge that we was had. And he wanted Moses to stand up and say, no, these are my people. Yes,
you know, actually,
they have sinned, but I can make this work. We don't need to start over.
You know, the funny thing is, it's more than once, because the story I was referring to is not the time where he went up in the mountain and came back and they made a golden calf. It was a time after that. I think it was like the third time after that God was like, listen, you guys, and he goes, listen, you rebels, and he hits the rock and the water comes out, and there was that time. And then that was another time when like the people went crazy. So there's multiple times where God
multiple times.
Oh yeah, swallowed. He's like, all right.
Yeah.
You're gone.
It makes you wonder why he didn't start all over again. But the problem, the point of I think what's driving home is that that's who we are. Right? Yeah. that's what God is trying to do for us, is allow us through free choice to choose him. And he knows how vulnerable we are, how weak we are. But that's part of what's being played out. I think the Adamites were created, and also goes and leads into what we were talking about earlier, that maybe not all the angels have rebelled, is that the creation of the Adamites is the resolution to the angelic rebellion, and that they're watching this play out and making their decisions this way and that way, and also intersecting with that the angels don't know everything, because the book of Corinthians talks about, had they known about the resurrection, they wouldn't have ensured Jesus was crucified. I'm talking about the fallen angels who run this world, right? So they don't know everything.
There's also another passage where it describes when people accept Jesus, that they're very interested It said, I forget what it was, but it says the angels have great interest in exactly what's going on with these people. Yeah, I forget the passage that was. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. No.
Yeah,
weren't interrupting.
Well, I'll tell you the interesting thing too. That, the Bible was previously, we were under the law of sin and death. Now, here's an interesting idea. This is just something that I've thought about recently when I was studying the Bible and reading a bunch of things. But like a lot of times, God, like they sinned, and then God took them out, like done, out. And now a lot of times you think these people sinned, and then God killed them, and they went to hell. They didn't get the forgiveness. And I think, I'm not 100% sure if that's exactly where they went in all cases. I think the punishment of them dying was the punishment of death. And so they may have gone to be with God in some way after they sinned, and that's their punishment was the sin. That's what was the law of sin and death. And so like if they didn't die, if the calf wasn't sacrificed for the sin, or the sin was so great that there was no creature that could be sacrificed, then they had to die in order to be given their forgiveness.
What do you think about that, Gary?
Well, interesting idea.
It's certainly a possibility. So I mean, obviously, there was a punishment that was set down.
Ensued.
Yeah, and that.
So they didn't have to endure internal punishment.
Yeah, if they haven't gone to eternal punishment, then that means they're going to be part of the resurrection sequence. And then they'll go under the judgment. So if you roll that forward to Israelites specifically, they have a different resurrection sequence than we're talked about Christ, the first fruits. Then when he comes, those are still asleep and those who are still alive. And then you've got also the mark of the beast, people who are beheaded for not taking the mark of the beast. They have another resurrection as well. But there's one more other than the last one in Revelation, where you have the resurrection of the dead that are going to go under the judgment, right? You have one in Ezekiel 37, which is the valley of the dry bones. And this is happening at the time of the last 3.5 years. And we know the timing of that because after you have the resurrection of the dry bones of all of Israel past, you have the exodus as you get into the teens in Ezekiel 37 of Jesus leading all of Israel who have been awakened in the first 3.5 years of the last 7, along with visible Judah around the world leading in Exodus. And we know it's Jesus in Micah 2 and 5, where their king, their Lord, will lead them in this Exodus. And that we know that Judea, who are in the covenant land in the time of the Antichrist, at the time of the abomination, they have fled to the wilderness. This is where they're going to be led to Israel and Judea around the world in the Exodus to meet up with them. And those people who have fled to the wilderness are being protected by God for 3.5 years, as Revelation 12 talks about, which is the time of the war in heaven
the
that
second
we're
half
talking
of
about. Yeah. And where we get the full third of the angels of being rebelled by then. So
see, I think that's why they're continuously trying to make more, because like, think about it. You read this and you know what your end is coming, but it says a third of the angel, a third of the stars, which, by the way, people don't know that the third of the stars, the people in church that tell you Satan fell with a third of the angels, actually comes from a verse in Revelation where it says the great dragon swiped his tail and took out of the sky a third of the stars. And the word stars there is also synonymous with the word angel in that translation. And so we're just assuming.
Well, in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament. So
there's a verse in the Old Testament that talks about the third of the angels.
No, stars.
Sorry. Yeah. Story, of course.
Starry host.
Them bones, them dry bones.
Yeah, I'll tell you something else about stars.
Wait a minute.
About
the formation of the breathing life into these Israelis.
The dry bones. The dry bones.
So is that going to be actual original Israelites?
I don't know, but you don't want to get.
Well, they're going. Yes, it will be the original Israelites, and they're going to go under the judgment at that time. Okay. Some to everlasting life, and some to the
great white throne judgment.
No, this is a separate one for Israel than for the church. Right. And that's what Daniel 12 is talking about when Michael stands. Yeah. And everybody thinks that's talking about rapture. No, this is the resurrection
Right.
and it comes in the time of Jacob's trouble. And you get trouble in there as well being used so you can sync up the timing. But this is about the resurrection of the Israelites, all of Israel, Judah, the southern kingdom, Israel, the northern kingdom, that are going to go under the judgment.
Okay, so they're resurrected and they're going to meet the Jews that have fled the Antichrist in that area?
Yes.
I mean, they're going to be joined together?
Yes.
Wow.
And they're going to be joined as one stick again, one pole, right? Into one king. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
It's going to be interesting. Yeah, so
I'm a huge prophecy buff, so
that's super interesting. I've not really fully had an opinion on what that is yet, but that's very interesting. I could see that. That's pretty cool.
Well, I was doing an interview with a fellow who does podcasts out of California who wanted to talk about zombies and zombies in the Bible, and I'm going, okay, we'll do an interview on that. And he was referring to Ezekiel 37. I said, well, I don't think those are zombies. Here's what I think.
That's pretty funny. I mean, all I say is like, don't cremate me. Like, I just, I want to at least have my bones so that in case I do get rid of
Yeah, but my father, who is a cardiovascular surgeon, okay, he's amazing Christian all his life. He was cremated when he passed. And I used to be a mortician. I lived in a mortuary for 5 years. I was an apprentice embalmer. And we had a crematorium, and I never wanted to be cremated. I thought it was kind of like a pagan defiance of, oh yeah, God put this back together, But my dad chose to do that, and it made me understand it doesn't matter. God,
it doesn't matter. Obviously.
Of course. He's Alpha Omega. He can bring you back into your new body. But for me,
I used to tell people like, don't ever get cremated. You know why? Because I used to look in the little window in the crematorium, and when they put you in there and turn the flames on, all of a sudden the body would sit up and go, ah, like that. And it was not true, but just to freak people out,
For me, my choice is to be buried as well, because it's just too eerily, cremation for me is just too eerily like the second death into the lake of fire or punishment forever. And I'm going, you know what? That just, this doesn't sit right with me. Just that whole symbolic.
Just throw me in a box,
don't just put me in a cardboard box and bury me somewhere in the yard. It doesn't have to be a fancy box. Cardboard box is good enough. Okay. I was going to say interesting when we mentioned stars and the synonymous nature of stars and angels. There's also this thing that a lot of people like to call astrology. Oh, I'm a Cancer. I'm a Pisces. I'm a Sagittarius. You want to know what those things really are?
Definitely.
Those are names of demons.
Yes.
People don't know that, but you're literally
angels, anyways, fallen angels.
Yeah, fallen angels. So, like those names, like, oh, I'm a Cancer, and you get this tattoo. You're literally tattooing a demonic entity's name on your arm and saying, "I am this entity." And they're like, "Oh, I have all these personalities that portray this character." Yeah. Well, yeah, you probably have a demon that's inhabiting you. Maybe that's why you get those characteristics.
It's polytheism to get you used to the idea to accept that these gods are there and they have influence over your life, and by accepting that, you give them that entrance to have that control over you. It's a solar thing. It's part of sun worship. It was created by Enoch, son of Cain, according to the secret societies and Masons, and everything about Enoch, son of Cain is solar. Just as everything about Noah and the descendants of Seth and the Israelites, everything was based around the lunar calendar. And so, and a lot of people say, well, what about the Book of Jubilees? Well, the Essenes, who are the polytheists of Judaic society, they believe their religion came from Heliopolis and was the true religion of Moses, and monotheism is something that went rogue within the Egyptian religion. Jubilees was their most sacred book because they worship fallen angels and don't even give up their names even upon death at that time. And I have a great document for people on the scenes if they want it, to find out who they really are and what's going on with how they conflate terms like the Nazarite is something that really misleads a lot of Christians, because that's how their way of them being able to say, well, John the Baptist was an Essene, and Jesus was an Essene, and then therefore he was a polytheist, and then he's not what you were told. It's just
interesting. I didn't know that.
Yep.
Even the Templars worshipped John the Baptist.
Yes, they did.
Yeah,
and Baphomet, a goat god, probably Azazel, right?
Right.
Yep. Yeah. Now let's talk a little bit. We got to get into the seed of Satan. Let's just go into that, because that's really interesting, and that's kind of something that we can discuss more in depth, because it's very interesting. A lot of people, a lot of Christians don't seem to know this, but in Genesis it says that Satan, or whatever you want to call him, he has a seed. Okay. And this is very, very, looked over at in church. They're just like, oh, that's the seed of evil. Well, it says the woman has a seed, and it says that the woman's seed will bruise the heel, he'll be bruised by the head of the serpent's seed. And so, if Lucifer has a seed, like, this kind of gets into what are Nephilim? You know what I mean? Like, what do we, like, is that what they're referring to? And it's a kind of an interesting concept that a lot of people don't seem to know a lot about. A lot of church people don't believe in the Nephilim. They don't believe in the, there's Anunnaki there. We got some, they don't really believe in giants. They're like, oh, that's, even though Abraham Lincoln talks about it, and it literally says, if you Google Abraham Lincoln, quote, that there was a race of extinct giants whose bones fill the mountains of America, who gaze on Niagara Falls as our eyes do now. And it's in all our history books, and any early explorer talks about giants. But they just, for whatever reason, a lot of church people like to write that off like, oh, that's fantasy. That's fantasy.
Well, they spent a couple hundred years suppressing that in America, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. But,
absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
There we go. The Claymore swords, which is just but side note, I do sword fighting and lots of weapons training, and I've held a Claymore, an actual one. That's not a Claymore, but that's like just a considered large sword. But the Claymores and that sword, including, they found these swords. They found them, and they know, and not some of them were preserved. They believe that was one of the ones that was preserved. But they have found swords that are so massive that it's not viable that a normal human being could ever wield it. And me, as a weapons expert and somebody that trains and uses weapons, I held the Claymore, and it was laughable to be like, nobody use this. No reasonable human being, and I'm like 6 foot, nobody reasonable human being could wield this sword and think that this is something that a normal sized person carried.
Fascinating.
Anyways, but yeah, so the seed of Satan, though, I think that has continued. What is your take on what the seed of Satan is, Gary?
Well, a lot of people think the seed of Satan is Satan having sex with Eve, producing Cain, and that's the serpent seed. And I don't tend to follow that line of thought. I'm open to it, but scripturally I can't make the case, and generally the case is always used for allegories and using different sort of forms of the meaning of the word coming out of Hebrew and then in the New Testament for Greek. But then when you use that and you put it into the text, it doesn't make any sense. So you have to be careful with how you're using the definitions and make sure that it's, it isn't in conflict with the sentence, with the verse, or with the narrative, or with another passage in the Bible, because it's got to fit. So one needs to be careful with that. So we know Satan was in Eden, just as we talked about as Gadrael, and just as cherubim in Ezekiel 28, the special anointed cherubim was in Eden, which we think is Halel or Gadrael and Satan before he lost his name and fell from heaven. And so what the Bible tells us, though, is that it is the Nakash, or Nahash, as it would be pronounced in Hebrew. That's the word for serpent that deceived Eden. And so if that is the seed of the serpent, not as Satan, because the serpent is the one who deceived Eve, and he's the one that's punished. Satan's not punished. He doesn't lose his arms. He doesn't lose his legs. He doesn't lose his intelligence. He doesn't have to crawl on the ground. It's the species of this walking, talking, intelligent being that, as you take that word back into its primary words into Hebrew, and I won't go into too much minutia on it, goes back to necromancer and diviner and things like that. So already was a follower of the fallen angels led by Satan, is the one who deceives them. So either this is an allegorical statement in Genesis 3:15 as the seed of statement, or it's referring to something else. And I think there is a seed of the serpent. It's just not this physical Nakash that is going to be the seed, because we don't have that. And I don't think it's the Gnostic version of that, which is the Gnostics believe in, that Satan had sex with Eve. And I've got a 4-part document for people. I walk through every aspect of the argument, New Testament and Old Testament. I'm not against the concept. I just can't make the case scripturally for it. So if it's not that, then what is it? Well, I think Genesis 6 fulfills that serpent seed. And here's how. These are the sons of God. These are the angels, as they're described. I won't go into the old argument of how do we know they're the sons of God. We'll just, again, I have documents on that if people want that. And these are the highest ranking angels from amongst the watchers, right? As they're commonly called in polytheism or the Book of Enoch, these are the watchers. And the watchers show up 4 times in the book of Daniel, which goes back to the word Iyr, I-W, or I-Y-R. And that means watcher. And they come from heaven, and they're dealing with basically governance on the earth. And the seraphim were also the ministers, as we were told. So that's why you see all of that seraphim imagery that's amongst the gods and amongst the religions and amongst the kings who would have been their spurious offspring and would have looked just like them in the beginning, because the seraphim are defined in Isaiah 6. You take seraphim, which is the plural, back to seraph, means a fiery, serpent-faced, 6-winged angel. Right?
Well, seraph in general just means serpent too, and so some translations of seraph mean snake, and some mean angel. Yeah.
And the fiery part comes back from working amongst the fiery stones before the altar, right? So it all sort of makes sense. And that if when they took a physical body, they would have passed that DNA on, and that's why you would have so many of the offspring that would have looked just like them. And that's why they're called serpents as kings in Sumeria and you know, all over the world as the offspring of the gods, which was a demigod, which is defined as an offspring of a god and a human female, just as what you have happening in Genesis 6:1 through 4. And so when we look at the serpent seed, these are the seraphim watchers who are producing most of these original Nephilim before the flood. And if you look at images of what they may have looked like from a diluted perspective, and I'm going to bounce to after the flood. So you have the Rephaim, which are the post-diluvium giants, and so when you see the word giant in the King James Version Bible after the flood, except for Numbers 13:33 and once in Job, it's going to go back to Rapha and Rephaim. The one in Job goes back to Gibbor and Gibborim, and Numbers 13:33 is Nephilim, and the other time is in 6:4 before the flood at Nephilim. I won't go in any
the Septuagint, it just says, the translation, they just translate it all as giants, regardless.
Yes, because both being giants. There's just a distinction between the two. But where I'm going with is they produced the dynasties and the kings after the flood. So if you take a picture now, you understand all of that, and somebody Googles a picture of Akhenaten. He is somewhere between 1200, 1400 BC, depending on which chronology of history that you're using. I think more towards 1200 BC. And this is over 1,000 years after the flood. So there would have been some intermarriage. There'd be some dilution of it. He's got this long protruding chin. He's got these very high cheekbones, these large wraparound shining eyes, this elongated skull.
Does Akhenaten have
lips? And the picture, if you look at it, looks like a serpent face.
Wow.
You know, but it's interesting, even more so, Akhenaten's wife was Nefertiti's. People don't know that. And always. But Nefertiti's had 6 daughters who are portrayed in the same way. Nefertiti's had this, and if you Google, this is hilarious, actually. If you Google Nefertiti's right now on your computer, you will see a bust of Nefertiti's wearing this funny elongated hat. And you'll only see that hat photo. It doesn't matter how long you scroll down. You'll scroll for a very long time. And if eventually you look for it, there's about that hat bust, type in Nefertiti's bust, cone head, and you'll find really what Nefertiti's look like. She has a huge elongated head, and that funny hat she's wearing covers her gigantically elongated head. And the interesting point is Neph. Neph, of all of the Egyptians, there's Nefer, there's Nefer-Otep, Nefer-Oskep, Nephthys, like all of these words, and her 6 daughters all have the word Neph in their name. All of them have elongated cone heads. All of the people that have Neph have the elongated cone head skulls. And you're like, that's weird. Well, you look up the word Neph. Neph actually means beautiful one. And it's referred to as the ones from the stars in some regards. So you got to think like, why are they naming everybody Neph? Doesn't that sound a lot like Nephilim? Nefertum, Nephilim, Nefertum, Nephilim.
They took all of their names from the demigods and the gods.
Yeah.
So like, Akhenaten, you have Aten attached to it, right?
Yeah.
And before he changed to Akhenaten, he was Amun-Hotep. So Amun was the god, right? So they always put names, that were sort of who they were connected to or who they worshipped. So that would have been similar in terms of those types of head coverings in all of the kingdoms after the flood until they, looked a little bit more like us, right? So you have these head coverings that are in Sumer. You have them in every dynasty after the flood because they're covering up their big frickin' cone heads.
Yep, their giant head, which I believe is because their size came down to the more normal size, but yet their brain still retained the angelic knowledge and brain. Therefore, their head became much bigger and larger, even though their size was diluted down to the normal size. Yes. So that's what the cone head fame come from. It's a diffusion of Nephilim genetics down to a normal size, but yet retaining still the angelic massive brain and abilities with that. And it's interesting because that word Neph, you'll find it throughout history. You'll find it in all kinds of different things that are related to Neph. Like even in when it gets to America, this is kind of interesting. The Mormons believe the Nephites, or the Nephites, however you want to pronounce it, are the good guys that were in Mormon religion, if you don't know this. But Mormons believe these Nephites were the good guys. They're the descendants that were, special in that, and specially chosen by God. But they came from the lineage connected to Amaru, which is, Quetzalcoatl. They came from, and they believe that Quetzalcoatl is actually a form of Jesus, even though Quetzalcoatl demanded human sacrifices. It's kind of interesting. Not trying to throw rocks and start a war between religions.
Well, Quetzalcoatl would have been a seraphim fallen angel. He's the plumed serpent, the feathered serpent god, right?
Yeah, no, well, he's Lucifer, really, if you really want to look at it in some regard, or Satan, really, because you think of it this. Amaru is another name for Quetzalcoatl. So Quetzalcoatl, Amaru, Kukulkan, they're all the same derivatives of the same thing. And so Amaru is the snake. It's the name for dragon in the Inca language. It's the name for dragon. And Ka is the word for land. So Amaru Ka literally means dragon land, or it means the land of the dragon. America, Amaru Ka. America, Amaru Ka. Sounds pretty similar. America literally means the land of the dragon. Who else is called the dragon? Oh, Satan. Satan's called the dragon.
Well, a six-wing seraphim angel is a dragon.
Yeah, there you go.
This is just a heavenly dragon, right? And if it takes a physical form, you have the dragon creator gods in China. You have the Naga gods in India. You have all of the gods that are not all of them, but most of the gods depicted, whether it's in Egypt or in Sumer or in Canaan or in Asia Minor or in Greece. They're all originally depicted as serpents for the most part. These are the seraphim fallen angels, and they're led by an angel that has other traits as well as, but also called a dragon, right?
Yeah.
Also called a serpent,
Yeah.
and also called the devil. So
Yeah, also called the devil. Interesting. Yeah, interesting little sub notes.
No, that's real. Well, you were going to sing us a song at the end, Gary. You were.
no, I wasn't not going to sing a song.
We could do another 5 hours, but wow, we covered a lot of stuff, and I love all this stuff. I could talk about it endlessly. But I think it's so important to understand that the devil is real, and these things are real, and they want to destroy you, and your only hope is Jesus and the blood of Jesus, and to just receive him in your life. That's the only hope that you have to deal with this. And I think that's the most important thing that we could ever convey. Fascinating history. To me, whenever I get into conversations with people, I wait for that one entrance where the Holy Spirit's going to move something and the conversation opens, bam, and then I can talk to them about Jesus. And then I can tell them about, it's almost like a game in a way, just like, woo, when is that opening going to happen? But just there is hope. There is hope. And I think that's the most important thing that we want to convey. But thank you guys so much for coming on. Wow. That was a marathon. It's like 10 hours, man. But thank you, Gary, and thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
So
awesome. Thanks for having me on again.
Can't do a 3-part harmony as we go out?
Nah.
Oh,
I pass.
Once
No,
again,
no. Me singing would be sinful, I think.
all right. Well, God bless you guys. And I'll talk to you
do
soon.
harm. That's why.
Amen. Amen. I got my little, my Jew's harp. Ding, ding, ding,
Yes.
ding, ding. All right. Well, God bless you guys. We'll talk soon.
Thanks. Goodbye.
All right.